She did everything correctly. With the window down, engine off, and both hands on the wheel, the registration and license are prepared. As instructed, Elise Turner had stopped on a peaceful Georgia road. As if we've all been instructed. Quiet, obedient, and without abrupt movements. She wasn't fast, without a taillight, and without expired tags. The so-called standard traffic check was everything but routine. It was the type of thing that black drivers are familiar with. That type you hope doesn't become lethal. The type in which innocence is denied. You must demonstrate it. Furthermore, even in such case, it may not be able to save you. Her ID was not requested by the initial officer. He did not elaborate. The halt. He simply yelled, made a demand, and pulled out his firearm as if it were instinctive. With his fingers twitching beside his holster, the second officer circled. Behind her SUV, Eliz remained motionless and spoke softly. "One question sprang to her mind, officer. Why are you stopping me?" They didn't respond. They unlocked fire. Missing her by centimeters, one bullet ripped through the driver's side window. The headrest was struck by another. And Elise moved as no civilian should at that moment, the breath between life and death. Not because she was fortunate, not because she was upset, but because she had previously taught soldiers how to withstand ambush. Seen the war and knew when it was over. The cops were unaware of the fact that other black woman by the side of the road wasn't Elise Turner. She was a survivor and a decorated veteran of the Army. She was a registered gun owner and a tactics instructor. And the only reason she was still alive was because she had discovered long ago that compliance wasn't armor, that she wouldn't be saved by silence, and that sometimes the only remaining defense is self-defense. Everything happened in a matter of seconds. Altered. The same men who had walked up to her with unbridled might were now lying in shock on the sidewalk, one gripping his knee as the other halted in mid-strike. They had made a call. It comes to a halt. It was an unprovoked use of force, she said. They anticipated give up. She presented them with something quite different. Wrapped in resistance self-control, her bullets failed to kill. They were neutralized. She didn't become angry, Cher replied. What little of the body cam footage wasn't inexplicably tainted would eventually reveal a lady who was being viewed like a threat while attempting to defuse the situation. This wasn't merely a botched traffic stop. It was a sign of something more serious that had gone unnoticed for far too long. Racial profiling, wrongdoing by police, and the tacit belief that some people's lives are simpler to violate than others. However, not this time. This time, the narrative didn't conclude with a protest sign bearing a different name or an apology from a podium. It was over, with one woman refusing to be a statistic, two disciplined police, and a federal probe, because sometimes being the storm they didn't see coming is the only way to survive. Elise Turner was not a kind person, of a woman who attracted notice in public. Her tone was level, her hair was natural, and her steps were deliberate. 36 years old. Shelved alone outside of Savannah, Georgia, in a simple brick house. With a canine, she never had time to pick the tomatoes in her garden, which was named Bravo. By day, she was a self-defense and emergency preparedness instructor at a nearby community college. Her pupils recognized her as someone who could explain the science of situational awareness in a logical, calm manner. She added clarity to civil liberties and gun safety laws. She wasn't ostentatious, she was quiet. She was capable, intelligent, and subtly strong. Additionally, you would know if you had ever sat in her classroom. Elise didn't think terror existed. She thought that preparation was important. Few people asked her about her history, even though it was no secret. Her military service was all that most people knew about her. Fewer were aware of the depth. Prior to going back home, Elise had served in Afghanistan and Iraq during 3 combat tours with the Army. She had received joint task training. Force units engaged in live fire, vehicle ambush response, and hand-to-hand fighting situations involving hostages. She wasn't an order-taking soldier. The manuals were authored by her, but others were taught to comply. She had several commendations, was a captain at the time she left the military, and bore scars that were sometimes invisible. However, after Elise returned to normal life, She wasn't after prestige. She was after life. She desired seclusion and tranquility. She had witnessed steady mayhem of battle. It was not something she wanted to take home. Thus, she made use of her G. After earning a master's degree in behavioral psychology, Bill began teaching in secret. What she kept but behind it was her readiness and her knowledge. That rights are meaningless if you don't know. Ways to keep them safe. She used the same phrases to begin her classes each semester. You won't learn how to fight in this course. You'll learn what to do when the conflict finds you and when not to. In any case, she worked with kids from a variety of backgrounds, but she always gave black women extra consideration. They don't once said to a coworker, "Teach us to survive." They instruct us to follow orders, and then, when that is insufficient, blame us. Elise wasn't bitter when she said that. She was sure of it. She had been discreetly mentoring a group of young women for years through a nonprofit organization that promoted civil rights knowledge and lawful self-protection. She stored Fourth Amendment printouts in her glove compartment. She guided a buddy through a hearing in traffic court following an improper stop. She was aware of the legislation. She was aware of the weaknesses. She was also aware of the fatal gap between the two. However, something had changed recently. In the previous 6 months, Elise had started identifying trends. Too many patrol cars are sitting outside her street. Marked more stops for drivers who resembled her. Important details were obscured in local news reporting U.S. enforced cases. One instance included a teenager who was tased during a standard traffic stop, and because of a technological issue, the department deemed the body cam film unavailable. There was a meeting in town. No, there were reforms. There were no repercussions. Elise began to spend less time with her students. More terrified of the world beyond the classroom and more engaged in lectures. In her office, a kid sobbed after being stopped on the way home from work for matching a description. Another, a mother of 2 Latina children, inquired despite working the late shift at a hospital. Elise asked if she should completely quit driving at night. Elise attempted to soothe them, but she was secretly losing hope as well. Not in herself, but within a system that seemed smug, stacked, and protected from responsibility. Weeks before to the shooting, she had already experienced one eerie encounter. Though she rarely discussed it, she saw a police car following her for more than 5 miles as she was returning home from a faculty training program. 2 petrol stations and 3 intersections. The cruiser stopped briefly when she eventually pulled into her driveway, enough to be noticeable, and then silently drove away. She said Elise didn't share it with a neighbor, who shrugged and remarked, "Probably just bored." Believe in coincidences. And she didn't feel secure among bored men wearing badges. She looked over her firearms license once more that evening. Valid and clean, Georgia acknowledged her right to carry in public. Her car was insured and had a valid registration. However, she went to bed feeling anxious after cleaning her sidearm and double-checking the lockbox in the glove compartment. She didn't have paranoia. She had every cause for being experienced. Due to most people in the civilian world don't understand what Elise Turner did. When those in positions of unbridled power confuse control for justice, things don't work out, and they move quickly when they go wrong. What became of this was not a chance occurrence. It was a component of a wider trend, a systemic breakdown, that was uniformed and distributed a badge. It was the unavoidable clash between routine and racial profiling, between power and assumption. Enforcement in between survival and silence. Additionally, during that little moment on the side of Elise wasn't considering politics, news stories, or hashtags on that ride. She wasn't attempting to establish a point. She was attempting to survive. For black women such as herself, even still, doing everything perfectly is insufficient. Elisa's instincts weren't the only ones. It had begun to itch. It was her surroundings. There was a change in the town. Discussions were more subdued. Individuals gazed more over their shoulders. When she passed the neighborhood sheriff's office and noticed the new patrol, she sensed it. Trucks that are excessively armored and military style. When she heard it, she sensed it. After asking an officer, a student mentioned that she was instructed to speak in a courteous manner, why they were stopping her. However, the community center's cancellation of their Know Your Rights event was the most devastating workshop because of schedule issues. Elise was wiser. A person had rested on them. The lien was also becoming heavier. A fortnight before to the incident, Elise received a discreet warning from a white neighbor who worked in county archives that her name had appeared in a closed briefing with the door police. He just knew that she had been reported as someone who regularly disregarded protocol and might cause problems while interacting in the outdoors. After thanking him, Elise secured her front door during the day for the first time in years. She remained calm. She didn't run. She made notes. She began to leave her dash cam running all the time, even while she was parked. She purchased a new body camera and fastened it to her purse's interior. She looked into her own arrest history. There were none. She looked for warrants. Tidy. Her name is on the registration for her car. No warning signs. No justification for halt her. There is no justification for treating her differently than a private citizen utilizing her constitutional rights. Being right, however, did not ensure safety in Elise's America. It simply made you more difficult to discredit, not more difficult to photograph. The letter then arrived. No return address, no stamp. While she was at work, it snuck under her front door. It was an unmarked white envelope. There was one printed page. You educate others how to respond to you. They learn to resist from you. One day, there won't be time to teach anyone anything if you press the wrong button. Elise burnt it in her sink, after reading it once and then twice. She didn't give a call. The cops. She was already aware of their words. Rather, she dialed an old acquaintance. Jared Cole is currently a senior policy analyst in the Civil Rights Division of the DOJ. In Kandahar. They had served together. He was among the few who could relate to Elise's calm demeanor. When she informed him about the letter, the flagged briefings, the canceled workshops, and the heightened patrols, listened without interruption. Then, more than the threat itself, he said something that made her feel cold. Elise, they're not keeping an eye on you because you pose a threat. You're effective, which is why they're observing you. Jared advised her to keep quiet, pause your teaching, and perhaps think about moving. Elise, however, declined. Not because she's obstinate, but because she recognized the risks. She would be verifying what they wished to think if she took a step back now. That she might be scared. It was possible to silence that information. That the boundary between legal authority and power abuse may be confused as long as no credible person dared to call attention to it. Elise Turner was also credible. She didn't use social media to post. She didn't shoot police officers for likes. It wasn't her grandstand. It wasn't volume that made her a threat to the system. It was clarity. She imparted knowledge. She got ready. She gave authority. Above all, she understood how to endure not just the stop, but also the courts, the appeals process, and the paper trail. She had already provided expert witness testimony. Her name was significant. For this reason, they avoided a direct confrontation with her. They attempted to discredit her for this reason by calling her troublesome. However, the pressure was increasing. Elise had seen a halt outside the university a few days before to the incident. Parking area. A young black student's automobile was encircled by two police officers. One was standing hand on his belt, close to the trunk. The other spoke in a firm yet low voice while leaning inside the driver's side window. Elise was able to read the posture but not hear the words. Fear. She approached them with her phone in hand. Visible but not recording. The instant they stopped when they seen her. No warning, no citation, just a brief back off. And the student drove away, clearly upset. Elise discovered a sticky substance later that day. A message on her windshield. Remain in your lane. She understood what it meant, but she had no idea who had left it. However, the threats weren't the most agonizing aspect. It was the quiet. Those who observe it away. The professors who expressed their gratitude to her in private but remained silent in public. When she raised the issue of police accountability, the city officials who had grinned during grant presentations disappeared. There was the pressure to be correct in a society that desperately wanted to act as though nothing was wrong. Elise thought she was bearing an unseen burden, one that became heavier every time a new, helpless face appeared on the news, and another. Then came a statement. "It's being looked into." She resumed journaling, something she had not done before since the deployment. She scribbled people's names in it, not those of her adversaries. The system failed. Before anything happened, she recorded their activities. Where they were going and what they were, what was the excuse for wearing. Then she scribbled, "L. Turner not," in strong black ink. Yet the indications were present earlier today. That Tuesday night, the day Elise saw a blacked-out cruiser loitering by the petrol station close to her campus during the halt. She had previously seen it. The same silent engine and unsigned plate. She had once inquired about such autos with dispatch. Received a hazy response regarding task forces and collaboration across agencies. She didn't believe it. No, it wasn't surveillance. There was a message, we observe, and whether something would happen was not the question that persisted. When was it? Because despite all of her training, Elise knew what America repeatedly teaches through her preparation, patience, and self-control. It's not enough to make it through the regulations when those who enforce them create them. The precise time was 6:47 p.m. Elise Turner was leaving college and driving home. She chose to stay off the expressway because she had finished her last class early. She took more sedate back roads, paths bordered by pine trees, mailboxes strewn about, and long shadows cast by the Georgia sun as it sets. She didn't drive too fast. She didn't stray. Her seatbelt was secured, phone unaltered. Nevertheless, as she came to a halt at a rural junction, she noticed the distinct gleam of headlights approaching from behind. Too near, too tight. She looked. At a patrol cruiser without lights or a siren in the rearview mirror, simply being there. Calm and composed, she let out a breath. Then the strobe in red and blue exploded through her rear window. With her right shoulder, full signal, engine off, and dash cam turned on, she pulled over, red blinking. Her hands were visible as she partially slid down her window, everything by the book. She waited. The policeman did not come right away. Rather, for 28 seconds, he stayed in his car and typed something onto his onboard terminal. When Healy saw a company but no ticket pad or clipboard when she eventually stepped outside, his hand was resting on his holstered sidearm too easily. He didn't ask for her license or say hello, get out of the car. She said softly, "Could you tell me the cause for the stop, officer?" "You meet the description. Take a step out." "You fit the description of the phrase." It was constantly heavy, ambiguous, weaponized. Elise remained silent. Calmly, she repeated, "I want to follow the rules." It didn't respond, "But I need to know whether I'm being held." He spoke louder, his hand now clutching Theopon. "Out now," I shouted, and then another cruiser pulled up. Only noise, no sirens. Dust is increasing. 2 additional officers appeared, one moving and the other circling to the left, behind her passenger side. Now that Elise could see the 3 of them in formation, their stance. It was no longer a stop. A confinement was used. Elise unbuckled her seatbelt gradually. "I'm going outside without a firearm," she spoke out loud. Perhaps she considered history as well as the dash cam, while she shot cracked when it was positioned 1 foot outside the car. Not a bullet, not a taser, not a warning. It struck the driver, burst. Her cheek was struck by the glass. It was reflex. She fell, her pulse pounding in her chest. She swung between her seat and the open door, one more shot. Where her skull had been just moments before, this one slammed into the headrest. They had no intention of hold her back. Her erasure was their goal. She only moved with clarity. War may teach you things. Reaching into the middle console, Elise found the locked carry case was certified by the state. The thumbprint opened. Sig Sauer P365 loaded, hers legally. She didn't fire mindlessly, though. Failed to empto murder. She recalled the angles, the noises, the yells, and the trajectory. She aimed through the opening of the broken window at incapacitating targets rather than heads or hearts. The lead cruiser's front tire was struck by the first round. Pop let out a scream. The car sagged. To her left, a second round hit the officer's thigh, knocking him down instantly but not killing him. He let out a yell and let go of his weapon. The two others dispersed, hiding behind their cars. Less than 4 seconds later, Elise had destabilized their position and eliminated 2 threats. With her hands up and her gun hanging from her, she stepped outside, barrel pointing to the soil with the index finger. Her face was bleeding as she stood in front of their dash cams. Butin phased. During a traffic stop, you shot an unarmed woman without cause. Reason. They're recording this. The gun will now be put on the ground. She also did. Then instead of kneeling in give up, not out of embarrassment, but in order to maintain control, preserve evidence and survive, she was yelled at to keep down by the 2 remaining officers. She remained silent. She remained still. The sirens cried out in desperation. There would be backup. Elise breathed deeply and firmly behind her ribs, as she was aware that the worst was yet to come. It was only getting started. Another 3 units arrived. 8 officers now stood around her, body cams blinking, weapons drawn. The wounded officer was hurried into a patrol car by one of them. Someone else told them to back off. A manager had shown up. Older and more severe. He gazed at Elise without bewilderment, not with disdain but with acknowledgement. He whispered something to someone close by, too low to hear, "Officer." However, Elise saw a shift in the man's face. Observed the hood-rain. She recognized that face, that of a man who had just become aware that they had touched him. Incorrect wire. The manager came slowly. He glanced at her hands, then at the gun that was lying there. INNOCUOUSLY in the soil. He inquired about her name. "Eiler," he said haltingly. "You are Captain Turner?" She responded bluntly. "I was." He looked at his guys. Now that the weapons are down, but not everyone followed instructions. One younger officer, who was too biased and high on adrenaline to maintain his firearm in a practice position. She shot. "A police officer we must detain." The manager moved in between them. "This woman is lawfully carrying, a former military member and a federally licensed teacher. You fired first and I neutralized you. She is entitled to certain rights. She is also skilled at defending them in court." The ensuing hush was oppressive. And hey, the body cam footage was rolling, capturing the broken glass, the unsolved questions, everything. When the initial gunshot went off, the woman was kneeling with her gun on the floor, unarmed. The officer had a leg wound that was bleeding. WASNT, a shot that killed. The tactical accuracy of a person who had been taught to protect life even in the face of danger. There was no suspect here. This individual survived. Furthermore, the reality was unfiltered, unquestionable, and irrevocable. It's now on tape. Before daybreak, the video went viral. Not because it was shared by Elise. She didn't. She lawfully and discreetly gave it over. Her purse arrived, her dashcam card, and her training logs, everything in order. Unedited and time-stamped. Part of it was leaked to a journalist acquaintance. At the Atlanta Ledger by her neighbor, a former public defender, just 3 policemen and 24 seconds of unvarnished, unadulterated truth without any trims or commentary stopping, failing to provide a reason, suddenly increasing the intensity, and shooting a woman whose only the danger was not fearing them. When Sunrise arrived in Georgia, a new term for the internet was popular. Elise Turner, the individual who knelt following their fired initially. Her past wasn't yet widely known, but it wasn't necessary. The facts were sufficient. She had done what she was told. She hadn't fought back. Additionally, she had every soldier in uniform that day was humiliated by the control and precision with which he answered. A national outlet's headline read, "She made sure to fire last, but she didn't fire first." From local authorities was foreseeable, sluggish, and procedural, administrative leave. An unpleasant misunderstanding, a pending internal review. However, every argument they made to the public was undermined by the footage. Even worse, the cam video that was leaked from the second officer's broken camera and inexplicably recovered using forensic retrieval revealed even more incriminating evidence. One cop murmured, "She shows a bad attitude." Let's check her. For prior, no violation, no warrant, simply attitude. It was a targeting, not a halt, and Elisa forced her toe move. With paper, not with demonstrations or news conferences, she sued in federal court for civil rights, claiming unlawful detention, improper use of deadly force, and racially driven profiling. She identified not just the participating officers, but also the department, the police department, and the training supervisor who failed to enforce strict discipline behavior patterns that have previously been recorded internally. Jared Cole, her lawyer, filed a simultaneous complaint under Title VI with the Department of Justice's Civil Rights Division after being flown in from Washington, D.C., requesting a federal probe into the department's stop and search policies that is conducted immediately. Elise wasn't finished, though, and she filed a move to have the incident formally changed to self-defense from assault on an officer due to excessive force. A legal study detailing how each round she fired was attached. Complied with Georgia's self-defense statutes and followed the DOJ's own threat assessment training recommendations. Every shot was intended to halt, not to kill, and every action was planned to protect life, even the lives of the guys who are attempting to take away hers. The motion contained a chronology, each instruction, each timestamp, and each stillness. It depicted not only an isolated incident, but a society in which officers' silence overshadowed the truth. Misbehavior was shielded, and a black woman, instead of being presented as a survival tactic, self-defense was presented as an aggressive behavior. The twist then occurred in a boardroom rather than a courtroom, and the sheriff, under pressure from the county oversight committee, stepped down not in a discreet or public manner, but before, and his internal communications were obtained by an unidentified source, revealing that Elise had been reported in, and unofficial deputies and other residents were given a watch list to consider possible agitators. Just names, no charges, no warrants. One-line read: high risk during traffic interaction. That list was broken. Elise's name appeared at the top of several federal statutes, and within 48 hours, Elise was summoned in not as a suspect, but as a subject of an official investigation by the FBI. Consultant. Her training as a teacher, her military service, and her track record of silence leadership. Everything came full circle. The things they attempted to use against her became her defense. She sat at the table, facing away from the detectives, however, next to them, when a senior agent questioned her. Did you ever think you'd supporting our efforts to hold a police department responsible for attempting to ruin you? She only stated, I didn't make it through 3 years to surrender in my own community. The officers involved received an indeterminate suspension, were deprived of officer. Lair resigned, but his body cam footage was still being reviewed by the police. Their badge and firearm are undergoing criminal review, demonstrated blatant disregard for engagement etiquette, and the district attorney suggested filing felony charges against using lethal force against an unarmed civilian and fabricating reports. 1. Anchor questioned, do we want armed civilians deciding what? As the media attempted to twist it in all directions, what is considered a threat? However, the more pressing query that reverberated throughout the nation was, why are people like Elise didn't gloat or give viral interviews, so why was she considered as a threat in the first place? This isn't just about me. It's about everyone who sat quietly through a traffic jam. She said in a single statement via her attorney, I didn't want to be the story, but I won't say I'm sorry for making it through. Then I stopped and worried if they would make it. She went back to teaching, and within hours her next class was completely booked. After the stop, it was renamed. What happens when power and rights clash? Veterans, single mothers, college students, and 2 recently murdered policemen who claimed that, up until now, they had no idea what their uniforms meant to other people. At least she wasn't interested in making headlines or winning legal battles. She just wanted what everyone desired. She never wanted to be anyone's hero. Not all Americans receive the safety, dignity, and respect that are guaranteed to them. Right to exist without being pursued by those who have vowed to defend you. But in reality, Elise Turner turned into something more than a survivor. She became a symbol of clarity rather than retaliation. She became well known not because she retaliated, but rather because she did it correctly and maintained her composure when bullets broke glass, because she was aware of her rights, and because she remembered the law when the law ignored her, never once allowed her anger to overwhelm her intellect. With that type of fortitude, the gentle kindness, which comes from years of self-control, not from hashtags, buried scars from choosing to believe in something while witnessing the world, fail individuals who resemble Jupiter, her case resulted in more than just courtroom repercussions in the months that followed. In the Georgia state legislature, it served as the impetus for a bill requiring a civilian oversight assessment before any use of incidences of unarmed drivers using force. The proposed law, informally known as ELAS's Clause, it had stricter guidelines for the retention of body camera footage and real-time GPS audit trails during stops, and cops who turn off cameras without reason face criminal consequences. However, Elise failed to appear, for she was in a classroom with 12 pupils in folding seats, each with a bill signing. A copy of the laws pertaining to self-defense in their state, learning how to exercise their rights without becoming more fearful. Elise wasn't a headline in the room. Rather, she served as a mentor and a reminder that resilience isn't always obvious. Surviving injustice doesn't make you resentful. Rather, it shows that you're willing to vanish. A black teen student who had just been detained while heading home. Fromm raised his hand during basketball practice and inquired, "What should I do if I'm afraid they're going to shoot me even if I stay put?" Elise paused for a long moment before she answered, "Fear is genuine, but so is your worth. Even when you wear the badge, the law is on your side, forgets it. Thus, remain composed, be straightforward, and keep in mind that your life is more important than their presumption." Elise doesn't consider herself brave, and she doesn't flaunt her background or post triumphant speeches. However, anyone who has watched that video will tell you that she changed the narrative. In a world when too many names often only remembered following a catastrophe, but Elise Turner is remembered for something else as well, her refusal to pass away in silence. That's the lesson. Perhaps being brave doesn't necessarily mean pulling out a gun. It's understanding when not to. Perhaps justice doesn't start in a courtroom. Perhaps the most potent thing a black lady can do, with someone who is more knowledgeable about the law than the ones brandishing the gun. To survive in America without feeling guilty about it. Because what Elise did it on her own terms, but it wasn't about getting even. It was about regaining the right to live. Standing continued to instruct.